welcome to the Come Off Conqueror show. Thank you so much for being here and joining us again this week. This week, I'm super excited for our guest. It is Jeremy Ostler, who is an incredible mindset and performance coach. I think is probably the best way to describe what he does. In a minute here, I'll give you more of his bio, but this week, I'm super excited to talk about our topic of breaking down barriers and self-limiting beliefs so that you can reach your potential, not just in your career, but in your life in general. Jeremy, is so nice to be here and to join us today. Thank you so much, Jeremy.
It's a privilege and pleasure for me to be here. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. I am excited for all of you to meet Jeremy and to get to know him better and to hear what he has to teach us today. But before we do that, please go ahead, the like and the share and do all that stuff so we can grow our channel and help spread these messages of love and hope. Your participation in doing that really does help us get these messages out. It's really quite miraculous to me to see how lives are being changed from this channel. So thank you everybody for your participation. And we obviously can't do this show without our amazing guests. So again, thank you, Jeremy. Let me tell you a little bit about Jeremy. Jeremy and I met through his cute wife, Crystal, who we've had on the show. I'll link to her interview down below. Crystal spoke about her Blues to Bliss journey and her success story of breaking down her barriers and her self-limiting beliefs to reach the success that she's had. And so it's kind of fun that we're going to continue that conversation, but with the other side of the coin with her husband, Jeremy. And Jeremy's got quite the bio, guys. He's really accomplished. He was a former interrogator for the military. Remind me, what branch was it, Jeremy?
Army.
Army. Okay. He was an Army interrogator, man. And a jury consultant. I don't know if you watch the show Bull, but that's one of my husband's favorite shows. And he's also worked very closely with individuals in high stress environments, trial attorneys, politicians, military professionals, think defense contractors, entrepreneurs, and business owners, and also lots of people like you and I who are just trying to break down our own barriers so that we can overcome our past and our trauma to really get to the life that we want to live. Now, with his background, as you can imagine, he really understands the art and the science of human behavior. If you think about it as an interrogator, you have to be really good at connecting with people and reading them so that you can ask the right questions and build their trust so that they'll give you the information that you're seeking. Likewise, with jury consulting, you also have to be really good at reading people so that you can help the legal teams understand the jurors and what they're likely going to, what sort of hidden biases and things like that they might hold, and help them come up with the best narrative that will persuade them. So, not to say that he likes to manipulate people, but learning how to do this and understanding people really from a subconscious level, he's taken that training and that background to create a really unique coaching system that leverages mindset training and high performance strategies that help eliminate fears and overcome self-limiting beliefs and mental barriers. In fact, we'll hopefully mention this at the very end. He can tell us more about this, but I found out on his website, he offers a 45-minute discovery call to help get to know you and what your goals are and a little bit about your past to determine whether or not his program is a good fit for you to help you achieve your goals and whatever it is that you're trying to do. So that's kind of cool. I'll give him an opportunity at the end to pitch that. Man, I don't know. He just sounds so cool and interesting that I would do the 45-minute call just to talk to him more about his interrogations. I would love to know more about how that all works. But in all seriousness, on his website, there were a lot of testimonials that talked about how just that one call was really inspiring and enlightening. And so obviously in continuing to work with him, they were able to do that. So hopefully during this interview, he'll give us some more success stories and how he's helped people. But I want to start with Jeremy's story. On his website, Jeremy also mentioned in his bio that he understands firsthand how low self-esteem can lead to some of these self-limiting beliefs and how trauma and the past that we hold on to can keep us from achieving our goals. He alludes to an experience that he had where his low self-esteem kept him from achieving his goals and where he wanted to be at his life. So, Jeremy, let's go from that point. Can you tell us a little bit more about you and this time that you're talking about on your site?
Yeah, so it's actually it's an accumulation, if you will, of
Okay.
past experiences that after a period of time I recognized if I didn't ultimately overcome and heal, I was never going to become the person or the version of myself that I knew I wanted to become. That I would be forever limited. And I always refer to it more as like this fragile mindset, right? This fragile mindset that when it confronts certain obstacles or challenges, we shut down as a result. And a lot of times we don't understand necessarily why we shut down. We just know that it happens and we seem to have so little power over what to do about it. And so I knew that I had potential. I knew that I was gifted in a lot of ways. And if I, on the website, I think I narrowed down the ways into to academically as well as athletically. But what I recognized is that academically and athletically, I was holding myself back. And it was because of my experiences that powerfully taught me in a disempowering way how to keep myself safe.
So are
I
you saying that you were gifted with athletics and this intellect, but yet there were things that were causing you to not believe that you had those gifts?
In a way. So it was more like if I actually put those gifts to the test and it proved not to be true,
Ah,
what then would that mean about my worth as a human being? So if you are told, for example, that you have these gifts and that you're really good at certain things, and you put yourself in a position to actually test just how good you can become, and let's say, depending on your measuring stick, that you fail at that particular thing, what then do you make that mean about yourself? And so I was hyper focused at that particular time and staying safe. And it was because I was growing up in very unsafe environments. So I come from a broken home. My parents were divorced when I was around like 3 years old.
okay.
I was very young, and my mother was 18 at the time that I was born. My father was 17, so they were just kids themselves. And of course, they were dealing with their own stuff. And now they were trying to raise me and my sister. And you can imagine the challenges that arise from that. One of which, as much as I love my parents and I'm very sensitive to the kinds of things that I would reveal, my dad, for example, was hypercritical, especially of like physical appearances. And so I grew up with all kinds of complexes as it related to how I looked. And I thought that there was a very particular way that you needed to look in order to actually be loved, right? To be valued. I never actually, what's interesting about that is I never actually, although I applied that standard to myself, I never applied it to anybody else. It
Hmm.
was as if I lived in a world that I thought it only applied to me because I never looked at other people and determined their value based on how they looked. But I most certainly did as it related to how I looked. Um, and so there's any number of things that end up developing as a result of this. Another thing that developed was this idea that if you had to work hard at something, that would suggest then that you are of lesser value as it relates to that. So I would find that things came generally very easy to me, naturally easy. I could do things very quickly and I could do things very well. And I developed this idea that if ever it became hard, there was something wrong with me. And of course,
Hmm.
I didn't want to come up against things that were hard because I never wanted to feel how unsafe it would feel in certain circumstances as it related more specifically to my relationship with my father. And so if you have an idea, for example, that perfection is the only thing that qualifies to make you a worthwhile human being, anything that will challenge that for you is something that you will stay away from. You have to protect yourself. And so if you find yourself in a challenging situation, what are you going to do? You're going to try to find a way out. I tell a story to kind of illustrate this exact point. So when I was in middle school, I was often in fights. So I grew up in areas that were tough neighborhoods, if you will.
Okay.
And so I was in a lot of fights growing up. And in fact, I knew very early that if you aren't willing to fight, that you're going to be picked. Life is going to get very, very, very hard. And fortunately, I was good at fighting, although I never looked the part. But I was always in fights. And I again was in another fight. I was sent to the office, and I was sitting in the office of this middle school when my science teacher just so happened to pass by. And so he saw that I was again in trouble, and he came and he sat next to me, and he said, Jeremy, if everyone in this school were to take an IQ test, I would bet my personal life savings that you would come out on top.
Wow.
And he said, you can do anything you want, and I just worry that you're going to throw it all away. Now, of course, at that particular moment, like I was inspired, I was humbled, I was grateful for this vote of confidence. But make no mistake, because of my fragile mindset, if ever the opportunity was given for the entire school to take an IQ test, I would have done everything in my power to avoid having to take that test. I would never have wanted to actually find out whether or not it was true, because in all honesty, it's not really a fair measure of someone's worth either. Let's say, for example, that you put that kind of expectation on someone and they don't come through, especially on a child. What happens here is it can be traumatizing, right? It can be traumatizing, it can be life defining, and in a way that becomes difficult to recover from. And so, and I know what his intention was. It was to fill me with belief, and in a lot of ways, it's exactly what it did, right? I was very flattered, but I even remember then after that going into his class and being afraid to raise my hand anymore because I was terrified. What if I didn't give an answer that was at the level of being the smartest kid in school?
Were you afraid of letting him down and letting other
Absolutely,
people down?
absolutely.
Hmm. So at what point in your life did this start to change for you? Or has it? Does that
So I
stage
would
or
I would
anything?
say that, yeah, so I would say that for absolutely everyone there are ceilings. And
Okay.
what we are trying to do is constantly break through those ceilings. And for any of us that say that we don't have any, we're probably self-deceiving, right? We're not being truly honest with ourselves. We still
Mhm.
have ceilings, and you'll bump up against those ceilings. Like you'll take somebody at the very beginning and you'll say that you have a ceiling. Let's say that, wow, and I'll just put this in like dollar figures because sometimes that's easy to wrap our minds around. Like, did you have a ceiling of making $60,000? Did you think that that's really all that you can do? And then when you start to put yourself in a position where maybe you start to break that six-figure mark, you come up against another ceiling. And then, of course, how many of us, if I were to go and I were to say, well, you could make multiple six figures a year. What if I were to even come to people and I were to say, you could make six figures in a month? You would immediately begin to recognize the ceiling that you're going to bump up against, right? And now all of a sudden, you're going to see all of these self-limiting beliefs that come into play. That's why there's a term that is used for this that I think is very helpful, and it's this idea of fatalism. So fatalism is this idea that we are powerless over events and circumstances, over even people, right? That the future is basically fixed and there's almost nothing that we can do about it. Although when I say that out loud, much of us would reject that idea. Our behavior would suggest the opposite. We
Mhm.
very much live as if the future is already written and there's little to nothing we can do about it. And so what my upper limits are now are very different than what my upper limits were when I was in middle school. And what I know is to continually search for those upper limits so that I can break through them. And ultimately, what that takes is the right mindset, right? So, if I were the reason I call myself a high performance coach, the reason that I focus on that almost exclusively is because I think that performance is the only thing that matters. In the final analysis, performance is all that matters because performance is what determines the results in our lives. It's what determines the quality of our relationships. It's what determines the levels of satisfaction that we get. If ever you come to a point in your life and you say, I'm getting things that I don't want, or I want to change the results, it comes down to your performance, your behavior, the actions you take or don't take in life. The problem for so many of us, though, is that we don't know why we do what we do, much less how to change it. And so, when you think about mindset, why does mindset matter so much? Because mindset has everything to do with how we perform in the world. When you talk about trauma, past trauma that still needs to be healed, why does that matter so much? It's because it affects how you show up in the world. It affects what you do, and when you do it, it affects your even to a physiological. There's a physiological response and reaction to certain stimuli that if you don't address, your performance is always going to be limited. When you talk about fears, why do fears matter so much? Because those fears affect so powerfully how we show up in them, the performance. What we're really trying to get at is how do we do what we need to do to get the results that we want to get in our lives? That's why I call myself a high performance coach. If I could even just from like my work as a jury consultant. So attorneys would hire me specifically to help them win their cases. And what I found very early on is that you could have the perfect jury and the perfect strategies and the perfect opening statement and the perfect closing argument. But the single most important aspect of trying a case was the attorney's ability to perform. If ever the attorney walked into that courtroom and failed to perform at the level that would be required in order to have all of these other fantastic strategies take effect, the whole thing could wither right before your eyes. And I would watch. So here's a perfect example. There was an individual. He went in to try his very first case. He had a panic attack on the floor and ultimately ended up passing out. An ambulance had to be
Mm.
called, right? An ambulance had to be called, and he never tried another case in his life.
Oh.
And if I had been there and had any kind of influence, I would have most certainly helped this man put himself back together and try another case. I would never have allowed him to walk away with that being the ultimate experience of his trial experience because I know that what he just did was reinforce this self-limiting belief that will play itself out over and over and over again in his life. He'll actually believe, I'm convinced of this, that he's come to believe that as it relates at least to trial experience, there is something fundamentally wrong with him. There's something defective about him. I would never, ever want any of us to walk away from those types of experiences with those kinds of beliefs. And yet we do it all the time. We do it all the time. And so in my trial experience, what I found more rewarding than was winning the case, which was always the ultimate goal, more rewarding than was getting, the attorney's confidence and putting together this fantastic case. It was in helping the attorney perform at the highest levels. And when you look at that from like when you look at it even from like what anybody does on any level, when you can get people to perform at the highest levels, you see lights turn on, creativity and genius tapped into that otherwise would never have been possible. And so if we can keep in mind ultimately that what we're after is performance, it's behavior, it's certain actions, what you'll realize is that everything else is just an appendage to it. We care about all these other things because it directly affects how we show up in the actions we take or don't take. If we can,
Sorry, finish your thought.
yeah, if we can get people to um, perform at higher and higher levels, you will see things change on an individual as well as a communal basis that never otherwise would have been possible.
So what I'm hearing you say is it kind of sounds like these things lead to like the performance in that like we can do self-sabotaging techniques or things to kind of make it worse or whatever. When how do you I mean, obviously you stop that with your mindset training, but like can you give us a preview of what that looks like? So how would, if let's take that attorney example that you gave, how would he have overcame going back onto the courtroom, this fear of, well, I'm going to have another panic attack again or whatever.
Yeah. So first you start out with the interpretation that he had as a result of what he experienced. And what I know, and so almost exclusively, the attorneys would hire me, and they would hire me for picking their jury, or preparing their witnesses, or whatever the case might be. But almost exclusively, it came down to working with the attorney, because you would find that the attorneys have all sorts of unhealed trauma. And although they would think that they could compartmentalize those parts of their lives, if ever in trial there was a triggering moment, it was as if they were taken from that moment and moved back to when they had this traumatic event. And now all of a sudden, their ability to make decisions that were in the best interest of their clients was compromised. And so I knew that I had to do work that would span time. Right. If ever an attorney hired me, we would do what we could to fix the short term things that we could fix. But ultimately, if we were going to do this responsibly, we would have no kidding coaching sessions in which we would go through and we would heal these past traumas. We would make sure that everything from our past that was incomplete and left incomplete was completed. Because it's only then that we can rewrite the future. If ever we think that we can just leave these things in the past incomplete, we're deceiving ourselves. These things live on. These things live on in our future. And in fact, what happens, as opposed to being able to rewrite your future, you end up recycling your past.
Mm-hmm.
Recycle your past as opposed to rewriting your future. So anybody that's out there that thinks that they can run from these things, or hide from these things, or avoid these things, or pretend that they don't exist, are fooling themselves.
Where's the fire emoji? I feel like we need fire coming out from you. This is gold, Jeremy. This is great. You're right. Like our Trisha just last week in session said to me, you can't heal a relationship with somebody or heal your future without healing your past, right? Like you carry it with you and it clouds your judgment. So I can see how these trial attorneys would be triggered in trial, maybe for whatever it is, but something could happen that would just snap, and all of a sudden there goes their mental ability to focus on what they're doing, and their feelings are taking over. And the same goes for all of us who have dealt with abuse. I will say, doing this show, I was kind of laughing internally at the beginning when you were talking about being afraid to try something because you're afraid that you'll fail, right? And people tell me all the time that I'd be a really good talk show host. And I had so many experiences before this show where people were like, man, you really should just do a channel. You should really just do a podcast, blah, 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 blah. You're helping so many people, all this stuff. And I'm like, but here's the thing is coming to this show from a marketing background where I have coached dozens of people in starting channels and starting their businesses and help them grow and do these things. I knew I wasn't going to be able to run the show the way that it would need to be ran to grow it properly, or what in my mind was properly, right? Or what would be successful. And so for the longest time, I didn't do it because I was so afraid that I wouldn't reach the level of success that all these people kept saying was going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? Bonnie, your channel is going to help thousands of people, blah, blah, blah. Y'all, we're lucky if we get like 30 or 40 views on some of our videos. Like it's just not growing to where I know it could. But a big part of that is my inability to manage the show the way it should be. And it's taken me a long time to not feel ashamed, if that's the right word, embarrassed maybe,
Yeah.
of where the show is.
Yeah.
And I've had to learn a really big lesson about accepting, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Just being happy with where it's at and giving myself grace and realizing one day when I have time, it'll be ran properly and it'll grow the way it's going to grow and it'll happen. So it kind of, but I think there's a book that I read, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, I think is what it's called.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite phrases because it is scary to step outside of your comfort zone. It's scary to look those limiting beliefs in the face and say, I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
I know what you think is going to happen, subconscious mind,
Yeah.
but this needs to happen. What, in your opinion, so back to what you said, interpreting the trauma and so my whole point of bringing this up is for me, as I've been healing my past trauma through doing this show and speaking with all these amazing coaches and therapists and survivors of trauma, is as I've been working with them and speaking with all of you, my trauma is getting healed. And as it's getting healed, these little snitches in the back of my head are getting quieter and quieter and quieter. And my confidence is growing. And I no longer need this world measuring stick or the old measuring stick that I gave myself, which is perfection, like you said, right? I'm a major people pleaser and a major perfectionist.
Yeah.
And as I've been working with all of you and speaking with you guys, my ability to just go with the flow is, wow, so much better. I'm still not like perfect at it.
Yeah. And there's a part of
Right?
this
Still a lot of
where
growing to go, but
yeah, there's a part of this where, and so I actually had this conversation with another therapist a while back, and she was struggling with the fact that there were people that, in her opinion, were inaccurately criticizing her or putting her down, right? They were inaccurately doing things. And it was her mission, therefore, to basically correct all of these things, that she had to go out and she had to correct all of these perceptions. No, 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 I really am capable, or I really am this, or I really am that. Where ultimately what I helped her to understand was first, make peace with being misunderstood. Do
mm,
you imagine? Like even as you start this podcast, right? There's all kinds of upper limits that you are bumping up against. That if you can make peace with being misunderstood, if you can make peace with embarrassing yourself as you move through the process, if you can make peace with being imperfect, with aggressively publishing imperfect work,
which is hard to do.
it can be very hard to do, but if you can make peace with that, my goodness, imagine what you'll be 6 months, a year, 5 years, 10 years down the road. This is what gives you the opportunity. In fact, for for all of my clients, almost none of them start out right out of the gate like rocket ships that go straight to the top. Almost none of them. And if I ever had my choice of whether or not we started more labored and slowly, or if we came out of the gate and we're nailing it, I would choose labored and slowly. And why? Because when people make it out of the gate immediately and they reach some level of success, first of all, those are the exceptions, not the rules. Almost exclusively, you will not find people that just make it out of the gate. Like I was in conversation, in fact, just this morning. Gary V, for anybody that knows him, if you were to look at Gary V and the level of success he is at today, and compare yourself to that where you're starting out now to where he is, it would be like looking in a funhouse, right? Your reality would look very much like what it looks like in a funhouse. Everything is distorted, right? The mirrors are upside. It's totally a distortion of reality. And then you hear Gary V reveal, I released thousands of pieces of content before anyone cared at all about anything I had to say.
Mm-hmm.
So
Love
that
it.
to me is so much more. If you make it out of the gate really quickly and you find success, you're going to think that that's how it's supposed to be. And if ever you run up against hardship, you're going to think that something is wrong and you're most likely going to quit. You will have been
Mhm.
deceived. But for those individuals that are able to develop their ability to experience embarrassment, to experience momentary failure, to experience you use the word shame. Of course, that's, even if that's what, to give yourself that permission to go through those processes, I promise you that the person you come out as a result of this is going to be so much stronger than the person that just shot through the ranks and inevitably will eventually run into hardship that is going to wreck them. They will not have had the foundation to rebuild, if you will, or to continue to build upon what they're experiencing. And so we just have to be able to give ourselves that permission to go through the process in order to achieve the things we want to achieve. And then, of course, this is why coaching is so important, in my opinion. We tell ourselves all sorts of stories. There are all sorts of narratives running around in our heads, much of which is disempowering, much of which is not true. But let me use the word disempowering here because you'll do it. We'll say things, and really what we're doing is we're trying to excuse ourselves, or we're trying to place the blame somewhere else, or we're trying to make it so that we look better than we really should be looking at this particular time. When you have somebody that you are working with that can see what you're doing, the kind of mind tricks you play on yourself to basically make yourself feel better in a way, though, that's not empowering, it's more disempowering, your rate of improvement it accelerates. So having that sounding board, somebody that you're working with to break these things down in a way that is digestible and effective and inspiring and moving, you accelerate the process of growth.
Okay, so number one was interpret the trauma, right? Releasing and healing your past. Number two is getting a sounding board to help you see what you're doing.
You cannot do this alone. I am 100% convinced that we cannot do this alone. And in fact, when you look at it just from like a sanity position, um, if what is the single most torturous thing that we can do to people is put them in solitary confinement. And what you will find is that even your most antisocial individual absolutely loathes solitary. Did I say social confinement? I meant solitary confinement.
You said solitary, don't
Oh, I did.
worry.
Okay. I don't know why that word just popped into my head as if that's what I had said previously. But it's solitary confinement. And what we find, the data will show that if left in solitary confinement, we go insane.
Oh, I
So,
I would. But I'm a social person, so I can see
but that's just it, is that we all are. And the only way in which
would
to
need to be
maintain our
social.
sanity is to be able to have these sounding boards, right? Your husband serves as this, your colleagues serve as this, right? Your friends serve as this. You get to put these ideas out there that get tested and then challenged. And then there's perspective that's added that becomes so critically important, even just to the maintaining of your sanity.
Sometimes our minds will keep us in that deceiving track, right? Like they'll keep replaying the lie over and over and over again, and you need somebody to point out what is true. And I have a good friend who, while she was struggling for a while there with suicide ideation, she she would ask her friends, "Tell me something true. Just tell me something true. Doesn't matter what it is. It can be the sky is blue, the grass is green, and just I just need to hear truth right now." And that helped to break her cycle of spiraling out of control. You made
Yeah.
me think of the book Permission. Is it called Permission to Fail? Getting you said get make peace with embarrassment and feeling uncomfortable, making peace with putting out imperfect work. I had an art teacher who she challenged me last year to paint something and then to scribble it. She said intentionally ruin it. She's like, and then try to fix it. She's like, but I want you to intentionally ruin it. And I said, I can't do that. Like, I looked at her like, what? You are asking me to do something that is literally impossible for me. I can't. And she's like, I want you. She's like, take that picture that you just did and I want you to scribble it. And you should have seen me. Like, it was, I couldn't. I was just like the amount of anxiety that was boiling up in me. And okay, I was in my daughter's art class. Okay. I'm in this class with like 7 to 10 year olds. Doing this class with my daughters. And they're all laughing at me because here's this adult like literally breaking down in the class. But her point was you've got to get used to making mistakes and
Yeah.
realizing it's okay. Like
Yes.
it doesn't look bad or it's fine. Like you didn't fall off the planet. The ceiling didn't come crashing down on you. She's like, you've got to become okay with this. I have yet to do it.
No kidding. So if
This is
yeah, so and
really,
there
I still haven't done it.
yeah, and so like breaking that down as to why, right, becomes so important because the principle that she is teaching is absolutely critically important for us to actually continue to break through our upper limits, right? In my opinion, as I listen to this, right, there's some kind of an attachment that you have to this particular stuff that is holding you back. But I actually did this exact same thing with my daughter. So she was having a too much. She was overthinking tests and her grades, right? So she had to get straight A's. And she was under this impression that if she didn't get straight A's, that somehow that would mean that she's somehow less of a human being or whatever the criteria that she is using. So I actually coached her to go in and specifically mark at least 2 questions that she knew the answer to incorrectly.
Did she do it?
She looked at me first like I had 3 heads. Like she couldn't believe the words that were coming out of my mouth. Like, why, what in the world?
You want me to get a question wrong,
I
Dad?
want, and it can't just be any question. It has to be a question that you know the answer to. Like if you're going through and you're like, dang, I don't know, I'm going to have to guess on that one doesn't count. It has to be, I know the answer to this. I'm going to mark this down. And she did do it. And what
I'm
she
having
got
a
is,
panic attack inside for her right now.
and what happened as
Oh,
a result is she got her power back, right? It put into perspective for her that making a mistake or answering a question incorrectly wasn't what she was making it mean. It didn't mean what she was making it mean. Now all of a sudden she can relax in a way that she was not otherwise able to relax, and with the perspective that until she had had that experience, she wouldn't have been able to do. And now, although she still very much cares about her grades, it doesn't hold the same power over. She doesn't make the same attachments to them that would hold her back or limit her, or worse, make her think things about herself that would be fundamentally untrue.
way to make me cry. I think I cry in every single one of these interviews. Good job, guys. Um, that's beautiful. I'm so happy for her. And I think I need some mistake therapy, some intentional messing something up. And oh man. Oh, I'll try it, guys, and I'll let you know how it goes. I'll show you the intentionally destroyed piece of art.
And
We'll
how
see if I can do this.
liberating. Yeah.
All right. So what do you do? Okay, so we have interpret the trauma and healing your past, getting help to help you see the truth and help you get past, um, help you start to get some clarity and help build those confidence. And then is there is it just those 2 things or is there something else that you suggest we do?
So there's tons, but I'll actually take it back. So when we actually experience trauma, like a lot of us don't know what to do about it, right? And we can experience trauma that's on the level of like sexual and physical abuse, or that's as simple as something your third grade teacher had told you,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
These things, though, we have to begin addressing. If we don't address them, if we leave them unaddressed, they're going to continue to live on in our future, and we're going to have little to zero power to do something about them. But what I help people to understand is that when they look at these, um, um, and it doesn't, so I might, in fact, let me just say I'm using trauma here maybe a little too loosely, but let's just say something that is a powerful, negative, life defining experience, right? Where you convicted yourself with a limiting life sentence and you said, this is who I am, and there's
Mm-hmm.
really nothing I can do about it. So when that happens, it's very important for people to understand the process that takes place. So you experience something and it's of a traumatic nature. And two things basically happened. The first thing is that you recognize and you thought something is wrong here. Something is wrong here. And then the second thing that you thought was something is wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
Something is wrong with me. As soon as you go to that particular place, already I'm sure that there's all sorts of like alarm bells that go off that say, okay, that's going to be devastating if you adopt that as a particular belief. But almost exclusively, that's exactly what we do. We say there is something wrong here and there's something wrong with me. And then what we do, we develop a persona to deal with what we think is wrong with ourselves. It's an attempt to cover up what we think is wrong with ourselves and to deal with it in a way that will give us some measure of success going forward. It becomes part of our personality. And we think that what we are describing is fact. We think we're looking at ourselves exactly as we are. We are not. We are looking at ourselves as we occur to ourselves. We are looking at ourselves through the lens of our interpretation. As soon as we recognize that it's not facts that hold us bound, that it's the meaning and interpretation and how things occur to us that hold us bound, that specifically um, get tied up in language, now all of a sudden I put myself back in the driver's seat of my life. I can reinterpret things in a way that is empowering as opposed to disempowering. In fact, and this has, and please don't misunderstand, I'm not talking about just making things up, not by any stretch of the imagination. If you walk away from an experience and you say to yourself, well, I'm not very smart, that's who I am, or I'm not good enough, I can tell you that is not a truth by which you should live, right? In fact, I would say that that is a fundamental falsehood, that if you continue to design your life around it, it will continue to drive your life in a way that you will never be able to experience the freedom, joy, and self expression that you so desperately want to. By seeing into that, by putting yourself back in the driver's seat of these types of experiences, now all of a sudden you can start to complete the issues from your past, which means that you've taken what's filed in your future that should be filed in your past and you can file it in your past. And second, you can start to identify the personas that you developed to cover up what you think is wrong with you, and then begin to answer the more important question, well, if I'm not those personas, who am I really? We talked offline about how important authenticity is.
Mm-hmm.
And I really, really believe that authenticity is critically important. In fact, there are so many of us that experience these traumatic experiences in our life. Most of us are aware of the freeze, flee, and fight um, instinctual responses, right? The survival instincts.
Mm-hmm.
Far fewer of us understand the fourth one, which would be fawn, FAWN. It's revealed in complex PTSD. So I can't remember now the author's name off the top of my head, but it's really important to recognize this, because what ultimately ends up happening, like when you think about this, especially for the people that experience trauma and they go to the fawn as the predominant way of orienting themselves in the world, these become people that are people pleasers, right? And so what they'll
Mm-hmm.
do is they'll constantly sacrifice themselves for other people. And in fact, what you find is they no longer allow themselves to be seen because of how, but first, because this is the way in which they keep themselves, they think they keep themselves safe. But second, because they really think that there is something wrong with them, so much, so wrong with them that they have to cover it up. Otherwise, not only will they be rejected and unloved and not good enough, but they'll never ever experience a level of success that they hope to be able to experience. Basically, they're just trying to get through life as opposed to truly living it. And so, and you can find, like, if I were to distinguish this, and I hope this is all connecting as I ramble here for a second, but when you go to the fawning stage and you go and you can, like, you'll recognize it in parts of yourself, right?
Mhm,
Most people will identify as this, right? We want to keep people, we want people to like us. And social media has probably made this all the more apparent and all the more difficult to navigate, right? That like button becomes
mhm,
so important to us.
mhm.
Um, that ultimately what ends up happening is we end up at the expense of being true, pursuing being liked. And as opposed to telling people the truth, we tell people what we think they want to hear. And if you don't start to recognize that as it relates, so if you can't answer the question, how did I become who I am today? You cannot answer the question, how do I become who I really am? So all of that work needs to be done in order for you to actually heal those past traumas, to acquit yourself from the limiting life sentences that you had convicted yourself at moments you were just trying to survive. If that work is not done, your upper limits, whatever those might be, are going to be far lower than what they could be, if you were to truly desire to achieve the levels of success and fulfillment and freedom and joy that you really want to. And so that involves going back, finding out what those experiences are, so that you can understand how you became who you are today, the personas that you adopted to keep yourself safe, to experience some level of success with what you think is wrong with you. And then you get to finally get to that place then where you get to answer the question, well, if I'm not those personas, who am I really? And my goodness, when people can answer that question and they give themselves permission to be who they really are, they will lose certain people in their lives. Certain people, because there are people, because of that persona, because of who we were being prior, they need us to be this person in order for them to want us in their lives. But I promise you that for all of the people we lose, the people that we gain when we are who we really are and want to be are so much deeper. The relationships that we develop are so much more authentic, are so much more fulfilling than any of the hundreds or thousands of other kinds of acquaintances or relationships that we may have developed. I would sacrifice absolutely every one of those for just one of these relationships in which I am free to be seen for who I really am.
Wow, that's beautiful. I am blown away. And it's not very often that I'm speechless. Um, wow. And we've ran out of time. And I think we could keep this conversation going for hours, but for the sake of respecting your time, Jeremy, I know you're really busy. I'd like to end with one question, and that is, how can people connect with you and continue this conversation going? Because that was so inspiring. I'm sure everyone's going to want to call you now. What is there a process? I mean, I know they can sign up for your free thing, but what does that process look like for people to connect with you?
Yeah, so there is my website, so jeremyostler.com. You can go there and you can book a call. That website right now is actually under construction, but the links all still work on it. And so until it completely converts to the new website that I'm having developed, those links will still work to book it. You can find me on Instagram at jeremy.r.ostler. Send me a DM, email me. I respond to my emails, jeremy@jeremyostler.com. Of course,
I'll
reach
put
out to
all of
me.
this down below, guys, just so you don't have to rewind and rewrite it. It's all down below.
Yeah, fantastic. And so any number of these ways you can get in contact with me, and I'd love to have that conversation.
Perfect. This has been really inspiring and helpful for me personally. I hope it has been for everybody who's watching. Um, wow, we got a lot of instruction of how to break down those barriers today. Thank you so much, Jeremy. You are so wise and so loving, and I can just um, feel your true self coming out and how much love you have for people and helping them overcome that past and that trauma so they can live a happy life. I know you and Crystal, that is your guys' mission together. It's really interesting that she found somebody who's just as passionate about this as she is. And I sent her a text the other day. I was like, I love Jeremy. He is so perfect for you. And it's true. You guys are just a match made in heaven. And I'm so happy for the both of you. And thanks again for being on our show. And hopefully you'll do it again sometime in the near future.
Yeah, no, and for all of the people that said that you're a fantastic host, I couldn't agree more. An
Oh, thank
absolute
you.
pleasure being here with you. Fantastic conversation, and would love to do it again in the future.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Don't forget to like we talked about. It does give us a boost of confidence, but it also really does help the way Google and the YouTube analytics work. Sharing and liking and commenting on these videos really do help YouTube know that what we've done today is worthwhile and worth showing to other people. So if you liked it and you thought that what Jeremy shared today was helpful, please go ahead and like and comment and tell us what other things you want to hear from us in future episodes too. That always helps give us ideas of what to do, what to produce. So thanks again. Until next time. Bye everybody. God bless.